The views and opinions expressed by the following program are those of the host, guests, and callers and are not necessarily those of this station or Webster Rockhill Ministries, its management, or other hosts or underwriting sponsors. Programs presented by KWRH-LP are for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Steam City here in Webster Grove. It's in tune with Arnold and Ellie.
Oh, Arnold, you were always complaining. When it was really, really cold, you were complaining. Then it was rainy, you were complaining. And then... Okay. Let me get you a little binky and put it in your mouth. That is so typical of St. Louis, isn't it?
It is.
You know, I heard some people the other day. I was sitting out in front of Starbucks up there at Old Webster, and these guys were just going back and forth about the weather in St. Louis. I almost went over there and hit them in the head with my with my cell phone. I was so tired of that conversation.
Well, it's something that we always like to complain about.
We do, and you know. It is so amazing, though, you know, kind of switching gears. You know, you think about the weather, and then you think about people who are like Cardinal fans. You know, I bet you there are people sitting out in a thunderstorm who are Cardinal fans because they are not going anywhere.
Well, here's a shout out to Cardinal fans. We were watching kind of one of those shows that has clips of all these baseball games during the day.
Right.
And it looks like every stadium was empty. But I know at Busch Stadium, for Cardinal fans, even a day game, it's going to be packed.
It is. My mother talks about that all the time because I told you she's a huge Cardinals fan. She watches every game. If it comes on at noon, she's watching it. If it comes on at midnight, she's watching it, you know. So she always talks about how there are so few fans in the stands in other cities. So I think didn't we play like Cincinnati or something like that a couple of days ago, and she was saying that they only had like 19,000 people. And, you know, she was saying that we have 19,000 people, you know, just standing in the parking lot.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
There might be more people on the team than there are in the stands.
Exactly. So, you know, we are great Cardinal fans, and we've got that great Cubs card rivalry going on this weekend. And we had a winner from our morning show.
Oh. Yes.
Who won? Listen to this. Won 4 tickets to the game tomorrow.
Holy smokes.
A Father's Day gift from an anonymous donor to the station. And so William Franks and his wife Clarice and his 2 lovely daughters are going to go to the game tomorrow, courtesy of KWRH-LP. And guess where they're sitting? They're sitting so close to the dugout that they could actually tell the players what to do.
Take that pitcher out, put that relief pitcher
That's
in.
right,
Don't put that
exactly.
relief pitcher in.
Well, knowing William, he probably will jump down and wait. I can do a better job than you guys. Let me do it. You know, go William, go
Yeah,
William.
congratulations to them.
Yeah, and they came and picked up the tickets this morning and just gave us a fabulous recount of how they came to be listeners because they are actually in the city and listen on a regular basis. And so they're going to listen now so they can hear their names. So William and Clarice Franks and the beautiful daughters, thank you for listening. And they're going to actually text us at the game so we can see them sitting in those chill seats that we gave them.
Wow, that's cool. And this will be a shout out. This is my impersonation. And for those St. Louis Cardinal fans who have been around a while, they will understand that this person also was a Cardinals announcer. Holy cow! We got that family going down there to see the Cubs and Cardinal game.
Yeah, man.
Harry Carey?
Harry Carey.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Harry and Jack Buck were together. I listened to them when I was kids. I had a little transistor radio I got for Christmas, and I would, and when the summertime came, I'd pull the sheet over my head, and I'd turn that on, and I'd put the little earphone in so my parents wouldn't know I was listening to the Cardinal baseball game.
And today you're deaf.
What'd you say?
See, that's my story to why I wear glasses. When I was a little kid, I loved reading so much. I would sneak at night. I would sneak under the covers with my little flashlight, you know, the little pen flashlights we used to have. And I would read and read. And by the time I got into first grade, I was blind. Okay, so don't do this, kids.
No,
okay.
No. Well, this next generation. Of course, we're working on that. This next generation is going to be deaf. So everybody needs to invest in the hearing aid companies.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. But congratulations to William Franks, and I know they're going to have a great time. William came here with this. He was so excited, to win those tickets. So we're glad that a good dad, gets to get them and take his daughters and his wife, and it's just what Father's Day is supposed to be about.
That'll be a great time. Hey, and don't forget to text us, folks, if you have a question or comment, 314-736-4510. This is In Tune, a 2-hour weekly broadcast which focuses on issues that impact and connect our community in the greater St. Louis area. We discuss and reflect on issues such as the arts, crime, education, employment, faith, finance, food, history, housing, humor, and justice. Ellie, I was reading a print source this morning and came across this article which reminded me of our interview last week. It says, the headline says, couple admits illegally storing 9 million pounds of hazardous waste in Franklin County warehouse.
What? How much?
9 million pounds.
What is wrong with those people?
It's really weird because they put it in an area in a warehouse that was in a floodplain.
Now, come on. I don't want to talk about the people, just talk about the people, but those people need to be talked about. I'm sorry.
They were indicted. And they agreed, I love this, they agreed to pay $1.5 million to the EPA for cost of dealing with the waste. I'm like, where do they come up with $1.5 million?
Well, the same way that the EPA came up with spending how many thousands of dollars on ink pens just recently. I mean, the EPA has proven to be just a bottomless pit of money. Just throw the money in there, and that guy Pruitt, you can tell I am not a fan of his. I'm sorry if someone is, but I'm going to rail against him.
I would never be able to tell that.
I'm waiting for every day that I read something about this guy, I am just like, okay, I'm on the plane. I don't care if I have to hitchhike to DC. I'm going to get him out of there because he is just the worst.
Well, it reminds me, though, of some stories that we're going to talk about today, of the many times, my words, inadequacy and dysfunctionality of the government.
Oh boy, how many hours do we have?
Yeah, exactly.
How many years do we have to talk about this?
Yeah,
but before we get into the serious stuff, I want to say, I got a couple of shout outs, okay? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I have to shout out to, our intern Davo.
Yes.
His mom and surprised him by coming to visit him. He knew his sister and his cousin were coming today, and so his mom shows up as well, and he was just so surprised. And then he told me today that this is her birthday, and her name is Rocios Rubio. So, Rocios, feliz cumpleaños a ti.
What Ellie said.
It was happy birthday. That's how you say it. Feliz cumpleaños a ti.
Feliz cumpleaños. Cumpleaños.
No. Cumpleaños.
Cumpleaños.
That's right. Feliz cumpleaños.
Feliz cumpleaños.
A ti.
A ti.
That's right. You got it. Now you're speaking Spanish.
Feliz cumpleaños a ti.
Close. Okay. To Rubio. The Rocios. Rubio.
Happy birthday.
That's right. To Davo's mom. And then I got to give one more shout out. Oh, those folks over in Shrewsbury. Last night I went to an event for the Route 66 photo deck. We were supposed to have the event on the photo deck, but the weather kind of pushed it indoors to the Shrewsbury Recreational Center, which is just an excellent center. And we had a little lunch and spread and dinner spread. I'm going to tell you, those are some of the nicest people. Those Shrewsbury people are just the best. And Felicity Buckley had an excellent event last night. So I just want to give a shout out to those folks. They're part of a historical society. And their thing is to get more attention for the Route 66 photo deck that's off of Watson Road, near the Walmart over there off of Watson. So they were great. They had a great event, and I appreciate them inviting me to come.
Cool. Very cool. We've got the 4th of July coming up.
Oh, yeah.
And a couple significant things related to that. I really love marches, being a music guy and a former band director. I love Sousa marches, or as someone I know says, salsa. Salsa marches. But I love a good march. And I was like, as I've learned going along in my life, that many times there's parts of history that we're not aware of because it's never been presented to us. But just because it's not been presented to us doesn't mean it hasn't happened, i.e., that's why it's called history.
That's right, exactly.
So I was like, okay, who's kind of a prolific black composer who would be kind of a complement to John Philip Sousa. So I went back.
I'm sure you did.
And his name is Francis Frank Johnson. Matter of fact, his birthday is celebrated tomorrow. He was born in 1792. He died in 1844. Very prolific during the antebellum period. Was a composer, which for blacks back then, African Americans, was very rare. He was also very successful as a buglist and on the violin. And bugle, there are several different kinds of bugles. Most bugles don't have valves. That's kind of why they're called a bugle. But they did have valved bugles back then. They also had keyed bugles, and he was a virtuoso on the keyed bugle. So it was really interesting. Wrote a lot of patriotic marches, ballads, quick steps, other kinds of things. Unfortunately, the music is only in piano version. I did get a copy of a piano version. I'm like, I may want to try to write it out for a march.
That would be great.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool.
Maybe you could make that the KWRH-LP March.
I'd like to have, I'm not a virtuoso pianist. I'm a fake pianist.
Okay.
So somebody who has the piano skills could actually do that. I know a pianist who could do that. But I thought it was very interesting to understand a little bit more about historical aspect about Mr. Johnson, and I'm going to do a little bit more research on him, and maybe we can get some music played of his once we kind of get it figured out.
And isn't it interesting? And I sure appreciate the research that you do, because there is so much out there. We could actually write a brand new history book just based on all of the hidden and lost information that you are finding. And imagine if we as a culture, as a country, really utilized all 100% of the talent, no matter where it came from. You know, it shouldn't be that, oh, we had this black composer.
Right.
This should be, these are composers, and intermixed in there, you have Native American composers, you'd have African composers,
Right.
You'd have Asian composers, and and we can't, because half of the country was also Mexico. Can't forget that. We need people from the Latin countries as composers, because all of them have helped to shape the country. And when we leave people out like that, it's like we're cutting off part of our own history.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today, because there are missing, I don't want to call them missing links, but for lack of better words, they are missing links of connecting history together that, from my vantage point as a quote-unquote white man, I didn't know.
Excuse me, white guy.
White guy.
Gotta say it right. Okay.
Say it again.
White guy.
White guy.
See, see, Sean will laugh about this, because when I see him riding down the street to come to the station, and there are times like I'm in my car, and then I roll down my window and I holler out, "Hey, white boy!"
Gee. What's he say back?
He just looks, and he gets startled. Then he realizes it's me. Then he's okay. But see, I don't say, "Hey, white boy." Notice that.
Right.
I said, "Hey, white boy." He gets it.
Well, these are things that most white folk
White folks.
don't know.
That's right.
Like, and what we're going to talk about today, Juneteenth.
To me,
40 acres and a mule.
I just can't even imagine. Well, 40 acres, used to be called where the rec center is, and the tennis courts, and that used to be called 40 acres.
Right.
But we didn't get a mule. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If I could have had my 40 acres and a mule, I wouldn't be sitting here today. So I guess that's why I was humble to the point. They knew 400 years later, don't give her one.
If a lot of people had gotten their 40 acres and a mule, or at least their 40 acres.
That's right.
Things would be dramatically different today.
We need to do a quick study while we're on the air here. What would 40 acres be worth in today's money?
Where?
Here in this area.
In Webster Groves?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, my gosh. That's right.
Yeah. Be worth a lot of money.
That's right. Imagine what the value of 40 acres really would be.
Well, in that whole 40 acres, we're going to talk about that probably in the second half of this hour. We're going to kick off with a little discussion about Juneteenth. And then in the second hour, just to kind of tantalize your eardrums and your inner ear and all of the cochlear hairs that are going there.
The cochlear hairs.
the cochlear hairs.
I can see them just waving right now.
Yeah, they're waving to the pitches that were
That's right.
that our voices are moving them. We're going to be talking and having a phone interview with the Griot Museum, which is an African American museum in the city of St. Louis on St. Louis Avenue. So those are some things we're going to be talking about. So Juneteenth, probably in the Black culture, as important a holiday, if not as important as July 4th, because it is the Independence Day or Freedom Day that's predominantly celebrated, and it's celebrated on June 19th, and that's why there's kind of this portmanteau of June and 19th.
That's right.
Juneteenth put together. There's a word, portmanteau, for people can utilize. It's putting two words together. So it's today. It's a largely local celebrations, public readings of a variety of kinds of things, but it's a celebration of history and heritage, and a little bit of history about this, that we're going to start with the Emancipation Proclamation from back from 1863, January 1. Prior to that, in September, Abraham Lincoln, he kind of floated a proclamation or that he was going to do, and these proclamations are what we now know as our executive orders. That's what we call them now, but back then they were proclamations. And the effective date was going to be January 1, 1863, to declare that all enslaved persons in Confederate states of America that were in rebellion, not in Union hands, were to be freed. So this excluded 5 states. It excluded Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, Missouri, because they were border states, and the counties of Virginia that became West Virginia, and part of the state of Tennessee, Lower Louisiana, and Southeast Virginia, which was already under Union occupation. So the problem with the Emancipation Proclamation is it really didn't free any slaves when it was issued. Because
Imagine that.
It was, yeah, exactly.
Imagine that.
It was a big political thing that was done, but it had consequences and teeth several years later. And so what was going to happen was when the Union soldiers occupied a Confederate stronghold area, then it took effect. Okay, so I'm just going to make this up right now. Let's just say the state of Mississippi was well under Confederate control, but when the Union soldiers moved in, every place that they occupied, the effect of the Emancipation Proclamation was good.
Okay, so it took effect right then and there.
Right when they occupied. So during this time, you've got obviously the wars continuing. But Texas really wasn't a battleground state. It was kind of
its own other country.
Its own other country. It had been part of the Union, but it was kind of way out there. And what was going on was, to escape some of these issues that were going on, people were moving over to Texas. They were bringing their slaves with them. They were migrating there. So there was a huge migration there, and the population of people in Texas and also slaves in Texas increased. Now, as we all know our history, General Robert E. Lee surrendered in Appomattox, Virginia on April the 9th. And that news moved very slowly across the country because some people, they weren't even aware that the war had ended.
Right.
Or I should say the conflict. It really wasn't the Civil War. It was the war between the states, technically. So on June 18th, Union Army General Gordon Granger, he arrived at Galveston Island with 2,000 federal soldiers. And they were going to occupy Texas on behalf of the federal government. And the following day, he issued this General Order number 3. He read this aloud, announcing the total emancipation of those held as slaves. And I will quote, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere." So here we are almost 2.5 years later from the implementation of the Emancipation Proclamation. It really takes effect in Texas. And that was the last place that slaves were freed, and that happened on June 19th, 1865, thus Juneteenth.
So actually, the descendants of those slaves should be given back pay, if you think about it. Time and a half, double time, extra back pay. because their people worked when they really should, for free, when they should have been paid.
Right. There was quite a long time.
That's right. Quite a long time to have some free labor when it's really not free. It's not supposed to be free, but it is free.
2 months.
Yeah. And then you try to give us talk about the 40 acres and a mule thing, and then we don't get it.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story,
That's
folks.
a
You got
whole
to
other
pay
story.
tuned to that one.
That's right. That's a whole other story.
So we have everybody's like rejoicing down there, except the people who own the slaves. They were not rejoicing.
No.
They were like, but the people who had been enslaved, they were rejoicing. They were like, hey, this is pretty good. And so it became some annual celebration in Texas. But as in anything, there was migration. Okay, now I'm free. I can move. So there was some migration up to Oklahoma, to Arkansas, back to Louisiana, on neighboring states of Texas. There were several migrations that took place. So then we kind of fast forward to the traditional end of slavery, which occurred in Texas between 1868 and 1874. They had to legalize it then. They had to wait many years to complete the deal.
Exactly.
But there was a disenfranchisement going on with Jim Crow laws at the end of the 19th century. We had laws put into place. Depression also caused another migration. So we had a migration right after Juneteenth celebration. We had a migration right after, during the Jim Crow law period. We had another migration during the Depression and World War II to north and to west. So those people migrating really kind of went to California, went to a variety of different states in the West Coast. So the civil rights movement brought attention back to Juneteenth. It kind of faded and waned at a certain point, but the civil rights movement focused that back in 1968. The Poor People's Campaign to D.C. really kind of prominently brought that back up, and in the 80s and 90s, the holiday was celebrated more by a variety of communities. There's in Flint, Michigan, it was stated, it's a time to reflect and rejoice because we are the children of those who chose to survive.
And I like that statement that we chose. It puts the power right in the hands of the people who have a right to make that choice. It wasn't that it was given. We weren't sitting around being enabled. Our people used the power that was in their hands. And that, again, is the key thing, is to, and I talk about this even with organizations, that quote unquote help the poor, instead of saying we are helping the poor, they should be setting up programs to empower the poor, not enable the poor. And sometimes people mix that up. And it's almost like they want people to remain poor so they can keep a job or they can keep a position, instead of look at the value of an empowered citizenry.
That's that hand up rather than hand out.
That's right. Exactly. The hand up.
There are actually, Texas kind of redeemed itself in 1980. They were the first state to establish Juneteenth as a state holiday. And there are 4 states that do not recognize a holiday, state holiday, or ceremonial holiday, or a day of observance. And those states are Hawaii, Montana, 5 states, New Hampshire, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So Juneteenth is coming up on June 19th. That's Tuesday.
And we have a lot of events going on right here in our community too, don't we?
We do. We're going to be talking about those after the break. So we're also going to be talking about 40 Acres and a Mule, and explain that to me, because it's kind of complicated. But it's a good story to understand because they both go hand in hand.
Yes, they do. And it's important for us, as again, we're not just beating people over the head. We don't want people to feel guilty. We want people to be empowered through the knowledge of the history of our country. And the more knowledge that people have, the more understanding we have of what was the real basis of this country, we can then begin to understand other things that are going on, and it empowers us, the citizenry, to fight against things that we know really will move us in a backward motion versus taking us forward, and taking us forward together. Not as a divided nation like we were before, but working towards unity And in that, we find power.
There's more united, and that's really important. I think it's great to understand the cultures and backgrounds of other people that we reside with and that we go to church with. It's very important to understand those things. This is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton of In Tune. You're listening to KWRHLP 92.9 FM, your community radio station in Webster Groves, Missouri. Welcome back to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton, and we've been talking about Juneteenth and the celebration that's going to be taking place Tuesday. Matter of fact, there is a local celebration that's going to be taking place at the Tillis Park SKOW Pavilion on Litzinger Road, and that's from 5:30 to 8:30. And for more information, you can call Kathleen Martin at 314-249-3968, or you can email sisterscarestl@gmail.com, and that is presented by Touchy Topics Tuesday, Sisters, Christians Advocating Racial Equality, and the Alliance for Interracial Dignity, and you need to do so by today. Advanced registration is required by the end of the day today. Adults, $15. Children, ages 5 to 10, $7. Under 5, free.
And we also want to say that that's because there's food there. So they need to know how much food to order. So that's another part of why they're registering.
Live music, food, entertainment activities, and more.
Yeah,
so that will take place also at the Griot Museum of Black History and Culture. They have an art exhibition and sale and Juneteenth celebration. And that is also Tuesday night from, I believe, the same times. So a variety of activities going on locally within our community and the greater St. Louis area that you need to be aware of that celebrate Juneteenth on June 19th, coming up this Tuesday.
And, it's very good that it is celebrated on the day. It's just like 4th of July. We don't celebrate 4th of July because it's the 2nd of July, and that just makes it easier for us to have time off.
But don't we want a 3-day weekend like President's Day?
Yes, we always. No, don't we get a 4-day weekend with 4th of July a lot of times? Because it's supposed to be, I guess, when 4th of July falls on a Thursday. You get Thursday and you get Friday off. Because I'm just not going into work after I've partied all day on the on the 4th of July. But that was always a 4-day weekend. And so if it was during the first part of the week, you still got a 4-day weekend because maybe it was on a Monday or a Tuesday. The problem is when you get it on a Wednesday. That's when the problem comes, because then I think we should have a 5-day weekend, but it doesn't happen that way.
No, it's great that holidays and remembrances are celebrated on the day that they were that happened.
That they were meant to. When I lived in Panama, a good example of that was Mother's Day. Mother's Day was December 10th. And so no matter what day December 10th fell on, it was a national holiday. Okay, not just a Sunday and you go out and you buy your mom something because it's that Sunday. Whatever day it was, national holiday, everybody was off work. And the gifts that the Panamanian government would give to women was just unbelievable. The government would give, refrigerators and stoves and microwaves and televisions, and I mean like big stuff. So Mother's Day down there was really a huge celebration.
Sounds like Monty Hall, let's make a deal.
Yeah, that's right. That's a reason to move down there,
Behind door number 1.
That's right, exactly. But I always thought that was a beautiful thing, because even if it was on a Wednesday, the whole country is off to be able to work and celebrate with their moms.
That's very interesting. We want to encourage people to attend those activities. And one of the other things that relates to Juneteenth, especially at the Griot Museum, is a discussion and understanding of 40 acres and a mule. And this is very, very interesting, this 40 acres and a mule, because when I was doing some background reading on this, it really revealed to me these kinds of things and these points. You've got power versus non-power. You've got money versus no money. You've got government versus the people. Of course, the people are the government, technically, but you have the institutionalized government, bureaucracy, versus the people. You have these kinds of other issues that we're going to talk about here in this next half hour. Wage labor versus land ownership, that argument. You have colonization. You have the Grand Contraband Camp. You have Port Royal and Sea Islands. And I'm going to talk about those things. Those are kind of all, like if you're taking an outline, which that'd be great if some people were taking an outline.
Well, we think everybody that listens to this show has now realized that they should have some paper, pen, because every week we give out such pertinent information that they need to be able to. Oh, look, Chris is in there like
he's scrambling for his paper
for
now.
his paper and his pen. Because we always give out really good information, good research stuff that you do. You know, people need to be taking notes.
Well, and if they have questions or comments, 736-4510, 736-4510. And if you missed this broadcast or part of it, or you need to hear it again, you can go to SoundCloud and put in the search engine Intune, KWRH, Intune Radio Show, KWRH. It'll pop up, or on iTunes also. You can catch it there. So
we're big.
40 Acres and a Mule. It refers to a promise made in the United States for agrarian reform for former enslaved black farmers by Union General William Tecumseh Sherman on January 16, 1865. A little sidelight, General Sherman resided in St. Louis and is actually buried in St. Louis.
No, where?
Yeah, up in Calvary Cemetery, I believe.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
That's interesting news. I never knew that.
I believe that's correct. Maybe somebody will be checking this out, checking my hard drive spins sometimes. Sometimes it spins too fast, sometimes it spins too slowly, and sometimes the laser doesn't point exactly right where it is up
just
there.
Out there, huh?
But many freedmen believed and were told by various political figures that they had a right to own the land they had worked as slaves and were eager to control their property as their own. And so free people, they widely expected to legally claim 40 acres of land, which is a quarter section, and a mule after the end of the war, long after the proclamations of General Sherman and the Freedmen's Bureau Act, which were explicitly reversed. That's another group, the Freedmen's Bureau Act, which is a very important part of this story. So I kind of want to go back a little bit, and this may be a little confusing. When I was reading through this, I was like, holy smokes, this is really convoluted. You have a variety of things happening. And the biggest thing, I guess, the overall understanding is that freedmen were promised land, my words now, land reparation, or being able to work the land in which they had actually worked when they were slaves. And there was this debate. Well, is this the best way to reintegrate, I'm not thinking racially now, but reintegrate former slaves into society as part of society as landowners, or is it better for them to earn wages? Now, this debate was going on back then, okay?
And I'm sure that it did not include a lot of the people who were going to be the recipients of the end result.
No, it did at one point. It did, which was very interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So you had this kind of conflict that was going on between wage labor and land ownership in the political, and also I would say amongst the abolitionists. They also had this kind of conflict because the abolitionists, even though they were against slavery, they weren't necessarily. I shouldn't say all of them. Some of them were not necessarily. They didn't know what to do with people when they were freed, and this is a problem I think that you see happens. That comes out of war or comes out of situations that are not humane. You see, what are we going to do with these people now? They've been enslaved their entire life, okay? And we have freedmen in the North, and now we have enslaved people in the South who are becoming free. What are we going to do with them? And it reminded me of situations like in Syria, where you have all these refugees. What are we going to do with these refugees? You know, a lot of them went to Jordan. Jordan's put up these multiple refugees camps, and they're trying to deal with the problem. But what happens in 5 years with the people? Are they going to go back to Syria? You know, so in any kind of wartime situation or situation where there's refugees, and I would say that after the war here, there were refugees of the former slaves that were free, but they still could reside on the land. They wanted to work the land that they had worked previously. They wanted to get paid for it. Some wanted to own the land. And you also had those landowners who technically owned the land, had it taken away, and we're going to talk about that here too. So I've got a lot to talk about
Yes,
in half
you
an
do.
hour, so I better get to it. So the policy during Reconstruction emphasized wage labor, not land ownership for blacks. So almost all of the land that was allocated during the war was restored to its pre-war owners, and several black communities did maintain control of the land, and that really was markedly increased in Mississippi during the 19th century particularly. But most blacks acquired the land through private transactions. They paid for it, with ownership peaking at 15 million acres in 1910 before financial recession caused the loss of most of that property. So the background, legally, slaves could not own property. Matter of fact, they were considered, by the Supreme Court case of Dred Scott, they were property. So they couldn't own property, but in practice they could acquire capital. So they could have money and they could purchase things. Matter of fact, they could purchase their freedom if their owner was willing to give them their freedom.
To do that, right.
Right.
And then hopefully they wouldn't be kidnapped.
To come back
and then turn around and have to serve more years in order to earn their quote unquote freedom once again.
Correct. So in the North, free blacks who lived in the North, which had abolished slavery, in some places they acquired substantial real estate. So there was real estate ownership in the North. But vagrancy laws in the South forced, free blacks into labor, sometimes back into slavery. Abolitionists, again, and I earlier had mentioned this, that they advocated full redistribution of land, but others didn't support any type of race mixing. And if you go back to 1816, the American Colonization Society was formed. And this essentially was to send blacks back to Africa.
To Liberia.
To Liberia, that's correct. And there were many that went back in a mass emancipation that way, but there was like, we're not sure that this is going to work. And even Abraham Lincoln had a colonization plan that he was thinking about. Then there were land grants. The idea of a land grant was an entire class of people could get a grant of 50 acres. This was proposed by Jefferson, to get 50 acres to any free man who didn't already have at least 50 acres in their possession. So you move forward to the war. Congress passed several acts to what I would say leverage and dismantle the Confederacy. One was the Confiscation Act of 1861, and this law allowed the military to seize rebel property, including land and slaves, and it reflected the rapidly growing reality that black refugee camps sprung up. So what happened is, as a Union Army moved into Confederate lands and they took possession of that land and of the slaves, you then had refugees, just like we were talking about what happened in Syria.
Exactly.
And as these refugees and this land was repatriated, more camps grew, more refugees. And with this consolidation of people, you had disease, you had wasn't enough food, those kinds of things. One big one in Hampton, Virginia, was called the Grand Contraband Camp, and it was actually a camp that had been formed in the ruins of Hampton, Virginia, after the Confederate Army came in and kind of, my words, blew up the town and burnt it. So they went and lived there in the shanty town. It was known as the Grand Contraband Camp. And many worked for the Army at the rate of $10 a month, but the conditions were horrible. And humanitarian groups were like, hey, we need to do something about this. They were like, maybe we need to relocate people back to Massachusetts. And some people were like, yeah, that's great. And some people were like, no, that's not great because we don't have enough places for them. So one of the things that happened out of that Grand Contraband Camp was that many were provided 2 acres of land and tools in which to work. So they were given some land to do that. Now, if you look at another part of the country, and I'm talking about along the South Carolina coast, down the Georgia coast, down to Florida, the northern part of Florida, you have islands called the Sea Islands. And there was a battle in 1861 called the Battle of Port Royal. And the Union Army essentially occupied all these sea islands. They may not have occupied the mainland, but they occupied the islands. Many people have heard of what's the famous golf place in South Carolina?
Hilton Head.
Hilton Head. That's one of these sea islands.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Isn't that where like what are they called? The Gula people? The Gula. There's a whole culture of people in those islands, and they've lived there for generations. They actually even have their own dialect.
Really?
And I think that if you kind of do a little bit of a Google search, you'll find that's a very interesting group of people that live along those islands. And it's very much of a tourist destination as well. You know, for people that really are into history and things like that, the Gula people.
That's very interesting. Well, and in Port Royal, they were offered, former slaves were offered the chance to settle into that land. And people were thinking in the Treasury Department and in Washington, D.C., this is our opportunity to settle this great social question. Whether properly organized and with proper motives set before them, blacks will as freemen be as industrious as any race of men are likely to be in this climate. So this was kind of an experiment, and what they decided to do was allow former slaves that were freed to take over some of the land. Black farmers actually preferred to grow vegetables and catch fish, whereas missionaries and other whites were like, yeah, you need to grow cotton. You know, that's a cash crop. You know, we need to get this economy going. So there was this conflict between the missionaries who were coming down from the north, the army, the merchants, and the former landowners. So one of the military governors of that place was advocating for permanent black control over the land. He got some support from his superiors in Washington, D.C., and black workers felt strongly that they had a claim to the islands and the land that they had worked. So during this Confiscation Act, which we talked about, it allowed the Treasury to sell many captured lands because of delinquent taxes. And so they started to do that, and there was this push back and forth. Should they be allowed to do this? Should they not be allowed to do this? There was a black farming collective, which outbid a lot of outside investors, and they paid $7 an acre for 470 plantations on which they had already lived and worked. So what happened was the Treasury Department won in some of these cases, and the land was sold actually back to investors and actually was sold back to the people who had initially owned the land. So it was a changing of positions by people, and I wonder whether how much, I know it was very political, but how much influence was pushed on people to change their decisions when they were like, no, we want to have those blacks who've been freed to go ahead and buy this land or go ahead and get this land. And then all of a sudden now we're reversing course and we're saying, no, we really need to give that land back to the original homeowners, or they have an opportunity to bid on this land. So you have the military saying one thing, you have D.C., the Treasury Department saying another. Now this is,
and again, we have to also pinpoint one thing. Basically, what we're talking about is giving back land to people that stole land from in the first place. Okay, that's the thing we really have to look at. This wasn't land that was just sitting there waiting for someone to come along. They stole this land. They stole it from the Native Americans. And then they put the Native Americans off their own land to claim the land. You know, it's kind of like that we discovered thing.
Well, it goes back to that initial
How you
thing.
discover something when everybody else is on it already.
You're talking about power versus non-power, money versus non-money. And what are you going to do with all these people? You know, they were following the Union Army around because the Union Army could provide food and
exactly.
provide water.
That's right.
And so now if you could repatriate them to the land that they had worked and allow them to do that and gain some wealth, why not? So,
well, what you just said was gain wealth, because we know that with land comes wealth and comes generational wealth. So if you already have the land and you're going to pass it on to your heirs, right?
Right.
So that's a lot different than I'm working the land and I could work it for the entire season, and just before we get to the point of, I guess, selling the crops, you could put me off.
Yeah, because how much is Hilton Head worth right now?
Oh my gosh, I don't even think that Trump could buy it.
How much is one hole on a golf course?
That's right,
cost?
Exactly. So when you look at that, it goes back to the basis of wealth, because now you're in the position to sell portions of it. So now you're gaining income from something that you really, you didn't own it in the first place, but now you're able to get that income from different people. So now you're gaining wealth that way. You're able to transfer that down from one family generation to the next. It's a whole different, and plus, wasn't voting kind of tied into land ownership as well at some point?
I'm sure it was.
So, it's just like today, you may reside in Missouri, but if you are not legally registered, I guess, as a voter in Missouri, you still can't vote.
Correct.
So even though you may have vast interest in what's going on, like let's say for Chris, for instance, Chris came from New York. I'm sure that when Chris got here, he registered to vote in this state, but if he was living here and had not registered to vote, he still couldn't vote here.
Right. He may pay taxes here.
That's right.
But until you register to do certain things,
that's right. Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So having that ownership was very, very important back then. It was a start. It was a foundation. And we know that the history of, for instance, like Rosewood and places that blacks settled in and really did well, those were eventually destroyed. And I'm sure that a lot of that happened with landowners as well.
Well, and what you're saying is what William Tecumseh Sherman did in his Special Order Number 15. He issued that January 16th, 1865, which instructed officers to settle refugees on these sea islands and inland, 400,000 total acres divided into 40-acre plots. Though mules were not mentioned, some of the beneficiaries did receive them from the Army. Such plots were colloquially.
There we go.
Well,
you all get it.
You all get it, yeah. Known as Black Acres, which may have been the basis of their origin. So his order was to have all of these islands from Charleston all the way down to the northern part of Florida, where there's the, what's the river? St. John's River, included in this. So this was a special field order. It was done by the Army. It was not a government order. And so then he and the Treasury Department started fighting back and forth. And really what happened is Treasury won. They rescinded this order. There was another thing that the Freedmen's Bureau had. They had instigated some assistance to refugees. They had actually some congressional approval to do some things. They had some congressional authority to do some things. But President Andrew Johnson, after the assassination of President Lincoln, decided to dismantle some of these things. And he took opportune times to dismantle them and to essentially negate General Sherman's orders. So the outcome was that Southern landowners regained control almost all of the land they had claimed before the war. The dialogue about land ownership as the key to success for freed people gave way and to implementing this plantation wage system. So it was still kind of the plantation things, only the workers were going to get paid, and it wasn't a land kind of thing. So there was this protecting of the land versus it went from protecting the land and transforming that for the freedmen to being an enforcer of a wage labor kind of thing. So it's this transformation of an initial reaction, an initial thought that the government has to help, and now all of a sudden it's something else that it wasn't designed to do.
Right. And for people that are interested in more information about the Geechee culture, they can go to a website, which is Gula Heritage, Gulla, and then the word heritage.com. They have tours over there. But again, this beautiful website, Welcome to Gula Heritage, Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. And it talks about, the authentic culture of the Sea Islands, which is a West African-based system of traditions, customs, beliefs, art forms, and family life. And so this is a prime example of that ownership and what it could lead to.
So a little understanding of Juneteenth, 40 acres and a mule, what that means. This is KWRHLP 92.9 FM. This is Arnold Stricker of In Tune with Ellie Wharton. We'll be right back, your community radio station in Webster Groves, Missouri. Welcome back to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton, and we've been talking about Juneteenth and 40 Acres and a Mule, and encourage our listeners to get some more information about that. That's great to search on the web. You get a lot more information there, and you can fill in some of the details that maybe we left out, maybe even correct some things that I misstated. But if you have a question or comment, we have a guest coming up here. Our number is 314-736-4510, or in-studio text number. And Ellie, before we go to our guest, I want to again recognize that there is a Juneteenth celebration of live music, food, entertainment, and activities this Tuesday from 5:30 to 8:30 at Tillis Park. And also at the area where our guest is from, at the Griot Museum, we would like to welcome Ian Darnell from the Griot Museum. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Hey there, Ian. How you doing today?
Pretty well, trying to stay cool.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
Yes, we did. So we recommend that you go straight to Alaska for that.
Yeah, that's probably your best bet, I guess.
Wish we could be closer, but no, sorry.
Hey, Ian, tell us a little bit about the Griot Museum for people who may not know what that is.
Sure. Well, yeah, unfortunately, we find that a lot of people, even from St. Louis, haven't heard of us, or if they have heard of us, they haven't made the time to visit, but I think it's definitely worth your time to come up. So we've been around for 21 years, since 1997. We were founded by Lois D. Conley, and she's still our executive director. And the special focus of the museum is on the St. Louis region's African-American history. So that often, is an aspect of American history that gets overlooked, African-American history, and then also St. Louis often gets lost in larger stories that we tell about U.S. history. So this is an opportunity to learn some stories that you might not know about your own hometown.
So what are some of those stories? What are some of the history and the stories that you have at the museum that you highlight?
Well, we use full-size wax figures, historical artifacts, and replicas of historical artifacts to explore some of these stories. But there are many, more than I could even really talk about, unless you have a whole hour just to talk about the stories that we feature. But some important ones include the story of Griot and Harriet Scott, who many people probably know were slaves from Missouri who sued for their freedom. And that case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against them and maintained their slavery, and that became one of the starting points of the American Civil War. But then we also tell more recent stories, like, for instance, the story of Sherman George, who was St. Louis's first African-American fire chief, and Percy Green, who was an important civil rights activist here in St. Louis.
Who also had a Supreme Court case with McDonnell Douglas.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, a lot of important Supreme Court cases with implications for African-American history originated in St. Louis. For instance, also the Shelley versus Kramer decision, which had such major implications for housing discrimination and residential racial segregation.
Exactly. And now tell folks where you're located, and is there a cost involved?
Yes, so the museum is located at 2505 St. Louis Avenue. That's pretty near the intersection of St. Louis Avenue and Parnell. Jefferson, as you keep going north from downtown, becomes Parnell. It's also, we often tell people that it's pretty close to Crown Candy Kitchen. That's a neighborhood landmark that a lot of people know. It's just a few blocks west of Crown Candy Kitchen.
And if, I was going to go, what would I expect to pay? Or if we're taking the family, what would we expect to pay? So we're not surprised when we get there.
Oh, yeah. So, well, first of all, I want to thank all of our guests who pay to get in. We are in the situation in which we don't have major outside financial support, so we really depend on guests to help keep us afloat. We do receive grants, et cetera, from other, the Missouri Humanities Council and other organizations, and we're grateful for that too. But we also really do need our guests to keep us in business. So it's $7.50 per adult, which we define as anyone 13 years of age or older, and $3.75 for kids, which we define as 12 or under.
And you guys are open Wednesday through Saturday, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, Wednesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m.
So if large groups wanted to go, like a school wanted to take a field trip or a church group wanted to take a youth group there, are those allowed? Can you accept big groups like that too?
They're not only allowed, we love when big groups come in. Yeah, whether it's a church group, a daycare, family reunions. Actually, it's a great destination for family reunions. So, we even actually, to show our appreciation for large groups, we offer a discount for groups of 30 or more who reserve in advance.
That's great. Now,
and that's 10% off the total cost of admission for groups of 30 or more with advanced reservation.
Now, this is the building, as I recall, it's what, 2-3 stories tall, and I've not been. I have plans to go, but I've driven by there 2-3 stories, and you've got just a boatload of things from what I've looked at on the website, and have a huge event coming up to celebrate Juneteenth this Tuesday night. Also, can you tell us a little bit about that and the 40 Acres and a Mule event that you have coming up?
Sure. Yeah. So to celebrate Juneteenth, we're having we're having a whole series of programs through the next month, but it all kicks off this Tuesday on Juneteenth, July 19th, with the opening reception of the 40 Acres and a Mule art show and sale. So this is a fundraiser for the Griot. It's another way for the museum to get some funds, but I think it's also going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be food, including ice cream from Crown Candy Kitchen. There's going to be live entertainment. A great local jazz musician named Amos Brewer, people call him Sax Man, he's going to perform. And there's going to be a reading of an original work called Cousin Roscoe versus the U.S. Army, which is inspired by some of the events around the abolition of slavery. And along with that, there's also going to be a ton of art by both local and international artists, all donations to the Griot, which will be on display, and it will be available for sale to folks attending the event.
Now, you've had a whole lot of events in the past that you've had poetry readings and literature readings and other art kinds of things. Reflect back a little bit on some of those things and let our listeners know exactly how comprehensive you get with some of the activities that you have.
Yeah, we have all sorts of arts and culture programming and also temporary exhibits on historical events and contemporary issues. Some recent things that we've had, one is called Black Women Speak. That was up in March and April of this year. It was an art exhibit with all sorts of pieces, paintings, sculpture, even a video installation by local artists who were Black women. And then last fall, we had an exhibit called Eminent Domain Displaced, which was all about the effects that urban renewal in the St. Louis area has had on the local African-American community. And that featured a lot of programming, including a special community event where people who were personally affected by urban renewal, people who had to lose their homes during the Mill Creek Valley demolitions of the early 1960s, they spoke about their experiences.
You know, what's interesting, listeners, is this is the second of its kind in the country, the Griot Museum of Black History. And like you stated, Ian, you've been around since 97, and it opened up as the Black World History Wax Museum. And I wanted to emphasize a little bit about Griot. That can you tell us a little bit about that word and what the importance of why that was used in the name of this museum?
Sure. Well, like you said, the museum was originally called the Black World History Wax Museum, and that's because we featured these life-size wax figures. Like you said, we're only the second African-American history museum in the country featuring life-size wax figures. But the museum has a lot more than that. We also have lots of historical artifacts, for instance. One historical artifact we have that's especially impressive is an actual slave cabin, a cabin where enslaved people lived from Missouri. So it obviously predates the Civil War and was up for many decades on a former plantation in rural Missouri. It was taken down and then rebuilt inside the museum. So you can actually go inside of it, touch it, see some artifacts that were discovered on the site. So the Griot was a lot more than a wax museum, so we decided to rebrand ourselves. And the name that we chose, the Griot, is reflective of our mission. A Griot is a person in many West African societies who is charged with preserving the community's history. The Griot would be a person in the village or in the city who would remember important dates and events, the ascension of kings, major weddings, battles, etc., and then would share stories about those events with people, often through song. So the Griot the Griot Museum here sort of aspires to be a griot for St. Louis, an institution that preserves the community's history and then shares that history with everyone.
It's very important, Ellie, that we have this kind of history retained and organized. I know the Mercantile Library does a lot of those things
They
for
do
the St. Louis
a
history.
great deal, yes.
And there has to be a collection point of these things. Otherwise, they will go by the wayside. Very similar to what we talked about when we had Linda Nance on talking about
Annie Malone.
Right, and the historical aspects about that she's just trying to keep all those things together so they don't get scattered and lost and forgotten, and then we have history that's lost and forgotten.
And we have to also realize, how do we continue to expose and make organizations like the Griot Museum, like the Annie Malone Museum, make these a part of school curriculums, make them a part of field trips. These should always be things that are continuously promoted in our education system. And not only that, but because a lot of this history, and probably 99% of this history, is not taught, particularly in the suburban schools, it's even more important that these youngsters get out and understand that, because it then helps them to better understand the world and this region and why we have some of the issues that we have right now.
We're talking about wax figures, and these aren't, as I was looking at the pictures, these aren't your mamby-pamby wax figures. These are really, really finely attuned wax figures. Josephine Baker, Dred and Harriet Scott, Elizabeth Keckley, William Wells Brown, James Milton Turner, Clark Terry, Martin Luther King, Earl Nance, Miles Davis, Madam C.J. Walker, Percy Green, as was mentioned, and Chief Sherman George. So just a
and
few
the
of
thing
those
is
that are
that
there.
we have included most of those people in our conversations
Yes.
over the time that we've been on the air.
That's correct.
So our listeners should be very familiar with those names, because we have done a lot of in-depth reporting about these people and the role that they play. Pretty soon we're going to have Meghan Markle's picture and wax likeness. They've already done a wax likeness over in Britain for her, and it looks just like her.
Well, some of those folks, they get really, they're artists.
Yes, they are.
Who make those wax figures. So some of the times they really look. Matter of fact, when I was online looking, Ian, when I was looking at some of the interactions of individuals with the wax figures, I was like, or there was a group photo, there were wax figures in the background. I had, now is that somebody who was actually in the photograph, or
exactly.
is that part of the wax figure?
Oh, yes. Well, what often happens is, right as you enter the museum, we have a wax figure of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who was basically the founder of the field of Black history as an academic area of study. And people will walk in, and before they turn and see who is ever at the front desk, they'll see Dr. Woodson, and then they'll step back with a little bit of a shock, when they realize that, wait, that's not a person, that's a wax figure.
That's how live these figures look.
They're very lifelike, yes.
That is beautiful. And again, it also shows that there is another art form that exists for, youngsters to even consider. We think about, okay, we can be a painter, or we can be a sculptor, we can work in metal, but gosh, to be able to work in wax could be a tremendous boom for a lot of young people that have never had that exposure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always looking for ways to continue to expose our young people so that they have a wider view of what is available, what are the possibilities. And I think that a museum such as yours opens up a whole new world for youngsters who may not have ever considered how to really express themselves in wax.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. So we love when kids are able to come and to see the wax figures, to learn a little bit about history. We even have some arts and crafts activities that they can try their hand at the museum.
Now,
So, yeah, the museum's a wonderful opportunity for kids to expand their horizons.
Ian, talk about what lies ahead. I know you mentioned the Juneteenth celebration, and we've talked about that. But your Juneteenth celebration seems to just kick off with Tuesday night, but it continues through the month of June. Can you tell people what does the museum have planned like for the rest of the summer, so listeners can understand and maybe plan to make a visit to the museum?
Sure, yeah. So we do have a full month of activities. It starts off this Tuesday from 6 to 9 p.m. with that opening reception. That there is a $10 admission fee for that, by the way. Then we have several events through late June and early July. One is on June 23rd from 11:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that will be a hands-on artist workshop. So a number of professional artists who work in St. Louis will be here at the museum, and they'll be able to work with anyone, adults or children, who want to try their hand at some different artistic media. Then, on June 30th, from 11:30 a.m. to 4 p.m., we're going to have a genealogy workshop hosted by the St. Louis African American History and Genealogy Society. So if you're interested in exploring your roots, that would be a great opportunity. Of course, African Americans who like to do genealogical research often face special challenges with tracing their family's past through documentary sources. So that could really be an enlightening opportunity. And then along with the genealogy workshop, there'll be a performance by a Civil War reenactor, a man by the name of Marvin Alonzo Greer. So the genealogy workshop and the Civil War reenactment will be on June 30th from 11:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then finally, to cap off the month of activities, on July 19th from 12:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., there's going to be a book discussion facilitated by Darnell Smith. And the book is called The Color of Law, The Forgotten Story of How Our Government Segregated America. So that will use history and the law to explore ongoing issues of residential racial segregation, both in the St. Louis area and beyond. And as I was saying, several pivotal court cases related to residential racial segregation, Shelley versus Kramer and Jones v. Meyer, and others, came out of St. Louis. So that should be of special interest. So that's on July 19th from 12:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m.
You know, one of the things I appreciate about museums is they're just not a collection of artifacts or history. They become interactive, and they actually do things like what you do, is you have events to follow up and to get more in depth. And I just want to repeat those for our listeners. We've got June 23rd, which is the art exhibit where you have some artists that are going to be coming in, 11:30 to 4:30. June the 30th, the genealogical investigation from 11:30 to 4. And Ian, correct me if my times are incorrect. July 19th from 12:30 to 3:30, a book discussion on the book entitled The Color of Law. Those really all sound interesting. And, you know, it's interesting you brought up the genealogical discussion, because we had someone from the Father Dixon Cemetery come in and where families are buried there, but also Lee Drake came in and we did an interview with Lee about his book, and he had done some research about families in St. Louis and provided some rough genealogical information to help families from the from the residential directories that were back in St. Louis, because apparently one year they actually did have blacks listed as separate entities in the city, and he compiled all those so people could trace some genealogical information back then.
That was really key. I know while he was here in the studio, I was pouring through that information, looking for my people in there, you know, because it's so important that we hold on to that. And because of the handwritten nature of ledgers, you know, back in the day, you know, things can get lost, things can get misconstrued. And one example was, I was just listening to a report. Camu Bell, who has a program on CNN, I think it is, he had been tracing his roots and had found out some very interesting things about one of his ancestors. Well, everything that he thought he knew about it actually had been proven to be wrong, because they went back to the little transcripts, the handwritten transcripts, and where they thought, let's say that his great-great-grandmother had been basically raped and forced into having all these children. Come to find out that the record showed that she and her white counterpart, her partner, they lived together amicably. So there was no slave-master relationship. It was a loving husband and wife relationship. And maybe during those times they weren't able to legally get married, but it was a loving relationship. So again, those kind of studies and that kind of genealogical research, I think, is key, so that we have an accurate look at our background. And that's important to pass on. I always tell people, when we pass on our history, we have to also continue to tell people we were kings and queens too. Our beginning didn't begin as slaves. We were kings and queens.
That's correct. So, Ian, tell us a little bit about your understanding of Juneteenth. We did a little in the first hour, talked about Juneteenth and 40 Acres and a Mule. How does the museum view that, and how do they communicate that? How are they planning to do that on Tuesday night and the rest of this month, besides the activities that you have?
Well, Juneteenth, of course, is a way to celebrate the end of slavery, which is perhaps the most pivotal moment in the history of African Americans in the United States. And more broadly, it's also a way to celebrate, to think about all struggles for freedom, all struggles for emancipation. That's really central to the way that we're understanding it. And then we also titled the art show and exhibit 40 Acres and a Mule. I don't know if you discussed that earlier in the program.
We did, yes. The
concept of 40 acres and a mule. So the idea of 40 acres and a mule was this promise of economic self-sufficiency, right? The idea that slaves, once they were emancipated, they could own their own land and have the means to support themselves. And the idea that was integral to really maintaining freedom. So this fundraiser for the Griot is also sort of about economic self-sufficiency and bringing the community together to support this important community institution. So we hope that people will be able to come to these events, especially the fundraiser on June 19th, 40 Acres and a Mule art show and sale, to do their part to support this, to support the Griot and to keep our institution going in the community.
Well, we are greatly appreciative that you've taken some time to talk to us today. And folks, we want to encourage you to attend the Juneteenth celebration down at the Griot or the Juneteenth celebration at Tillis Park. But on either one, you need to act by the end of the day today, because there are tickets available for both of those, and you must have a ticket to attend either one of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you have any questions about any of our activities, either the event on Tuesday or any of the other programming we talked about over the next month, please give us a call, 314-241-7057, or email us at info@thegriotmuseum.com.
And they can also go up on our Facebook page, Radio 63119, where we posted a very nice thread about the Griot Museum, so people can go there. They can see a little bit about it. They can click on the link there and go directly to your website in order to order tickets or to register for the events that are coming up. Not just the one on Juneteenth, but the one June 30th, which is the genealogical search, the July 19th, which is the book discussion, The Color of Law. You guys have you've got it going on. That's all we can say.
Mm-hmm. We're very busy.
Very, very busy. And it's important that we remain very busy so that we keep the heritage alive. I think that is key. And we thank you so much for what you all are doing. We know a lot of times it's on a small budget. Kind of like this radio station. It's on a small budget, but we do great things.
And you're doing great work down there.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us to be on and for supporting our programming.
Ian Darnell from the Griot Museum, we thank you very much for coming on In Tune. And folks, we just encourage you to be part of your community, whether it's here locally, whether it's in the greater community of St. Louis. Support activities and things that are going on that provide information, that give you culture, that give you a background and help you understand who you are and other people around you. I think it's very, very vital to be involved like that.
And Arnold, I just have to say, I know I don't want to make you feel like I'm patting you on your back, but I just thank you so much for the research that you do of bringing us these kinds of guests so that our communities can be aware of what's going on, not just here in 63119, but in the region in which we live. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Ellie. This is Arnold Stricker of In Tune. You're listening to KWRHLP 92.9 FM, your community radio station in Webster Groves, Missouri. Welcome back to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton. Ellie, that was a great discussion with Ian Darnell from the Griot Museum.
And it's always interesting to know that there are so many resources in the community, in our area, not just in 63119, but all over the region that virtually are unheard of by many people. And this town is brimming with history. So you don't have to necessarily be just a history buff to want to know what's going on. If you just have a curious mind and want to know about, the St. Louis area. I know I talked to this one lady, and I'll mention her. I'll give her a little shout out here. Jenny Shawley, who's a young woman. She has her own Edward Jones office up there in Brentwood. But she was telling me that she, as a young woman, she's new to the area kind of, but really doesn't know the area. Isn't aware of all of the different historical valuables that we have. And that was really, they're valuables. It's like kind of stuff like you put away in the attic, and then your grandkids come along and they go up in the attic and they start pulling it out, and they're amazed by what they find. I think people will be amazed at what they have here, at our fingertips.
Well, it's like not a history kind of thing, but a history in a different way. Like it was the National Bowling Hall of Fame was here. I don't know if it's still here or not. And then the Blues Museum,
right?
That's I've not been down there, but that facility was renovated, and for St. Louis to get that over Memphis, and Memphis still claims that they're the blues capital of the world.
We'll allow them to if that makes them feel good.
Yeah. But things even at the art museum, if you go to the zoo, different activities. We're just not talking about museums. We're talking about the variety of things that even these groups have, like these small little things, just like the Griot was talking about, the art conversation and display they're going to have, the genealogical, the book discussion. The art museum has a variety of activities that come in. The Missouri History Museum has a variety of activities. And with the opening of the renovated Jefferson Expansion National Memorial, or I think they've changed the name on that now again. I don't know what it is now. But that new museum opening up, I know that's going to be a lot more interactive. And museums, if anybody's ever been to the Lincoln Museum up in Springfield, that's very interactive. It's not like, okay, here's something and I'm reading it, okay, and I go to the next thing. And I know people have to survive on the funding that they have, and I don't dismiss that at all, because it's the information that you have. How it's presented, though, is also enticing and draws you in. So there are a variety of museums. The Soldiers Memorial will be opening in the fall after a 2-year renovation. So that will be an interesting site to see. I had only been in that once, and that was right before it closed, and I was like, okay, how many more uniforms can you see? How many more war artifacts can you see? And it seemed like there was not an organization to that. And there are people that actually do that. They organize museums in a flow, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a visual interactive that's technologically done, like the Lincoln Museum. It could just be how it's presented. And, like I said, how many hand grenades do you need to see? Or how many long rifles do you need to see in a museum? You kind of get the idea. But what's the story behind it?
That's right, the story.
And that's what is important for us as people who live in this area because, like you said, history is this town is rich in history.
Very rich in history. And I was looking up when you were talking about the bowling museum. There, you didn't mention the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Which we have, and I do believe that our very own Sean Green has been somewhat involved. Greg Marichek involved with the Sports Hall of Fame, and then there was a Hall of Fame out here in this area as well. I think in the Webster area. If Sean comes in before we get off the air, I'll have him verify that. But I know that he's been very involved in that as well. And again, those are things that are downtown on the 3rd Street. Is where the Sports Hall of Fame is. There's so much here.
There's
so much here.
A lot of them are free. A lot of them are very inexpensive.
Very inexpensive to go to.
And if you do take a group, I know many times you can get a break like that. So
yeah, I'm looking at the website now for the International Bowling Hall of Fame. You just never know who's got something out there.
Well, and St. Louis was a hub. Dick Weber was a Hall of Fame bowler, a very prominent bowler. I remember growing up, they would have the National Pro Bowlers Tour on ABC Wide World of Sports.
I remember that. I used to love that. And it really heightened my interest in bowling. I love bowling. It's great exercise. And it's one that when you go to a bowling alley, it's one of the few sports where you just see a range of all kind of people there.
Yes.
You will find teenagers there, kids are there, families are there, seniors are there, women, men, all races. Everybody's there bowling and having a great time doing it.
It's a great date activity.
I think so too.
For a group activity like that.
And when you mentioned going up to the museum, the Lincoln Museum up in Springfield, another great way to do that is to take the train up.
Yes.
From what I think my mother and my daughter did that several years ago, and they were saying that the train station is so close to the museum, so it makes it very, very easy to go up. You don't have to worry about driving, and the train trip is a lot of fun too. If people haven't ever done the little Amtrak train trips, those can be a lot of fun. And then get off, do what you do. By the time of the day, you're tired. Get back on the train and snooze for an hour and a half.
Yeah, that area of Springfield's very walkable.
Very walkable.
The governor's mansion is close by. Lincoln's house is very close by there. So good place to go to visit.
And when you're really talking about doing little family events, in this area, the first thing we want to do is, let's pack up everybody and go to the lake. And you go to the lake and there, generally speaking, what happens? Your kids go to the swimming pool. They go to the tennis court because they don't want to be around you, unfortunately. And there you are, you're barbecuing, you're doing whatever, they're doing whatever. Well, we just happen to be at the same place at the same time. Going to a museum requires the family to be interactive. They can still kind of run off and go and do what they want to do within the museum, but boy, does it lead to great conversation at the end of the day.
Well, and I know some school groups used to do this. They'd have a scavenger hunt in a museum. Not that they had placed things, but they had been previously, and they would give students a list of things that they would need to discover and understand. And so it would cause the students to go around and pay a little bit more close attention rather than, you got to go to a boring museum, No, so that's something to make it a little more fun, or do an activity that maybe the kids, what kind of museum would they like to go to? Because museums have a connotation that, it's dark, dreary, this big building that's in the middle of a city that, it's cold.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, again, everybody should have on their bucket list the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. That is such a fantastic museum because it takes you on so many different levels. When Ian was talking about the slave house, at that museum, there is a replica of a slave house. You can't go in it or anything like that. So that even made what they're doing at the Griot even more interactive and interesting. But again, it takes you from all the way back to the history of the Dutch being involved as the first slave providers, let's say, to this country. It takes you all the way back. It shows you the history of slavery throughout the Caribbean. And it's just a real good look because a lot of times you don't understand how far back and how many different nations were involved in the slave trade and how the diaspora was basically dispersed throughout, the Caribbean, throughout South America, Central America, and North America as well. Mexico, all of those, when you start to really get into the understanding of the diaspora, But you also, when you really study history, and one of the books that I think I let you read was They Came Before Columbus, and talking about really just the history of voyagers from Africa. So we didn't just come across the seas as slaves in the bottom of a hold ship. Somebody else had to bring us. Blacks were coming across because of the natural current of the ocean. And they were making their way to South America, Central America, the Caribbean. And there are so many artifacts in those regions that show the interaction of the Africans with the indigenous people of those areas.
Well, and those places, very similar to the Civil Rights Museum down in Memphis.
Memphis, that's right.
Very close by. Really, as I was saying earlier, fill in gaps that you don't get all of the history of that's given. So you have to understand all of it in the context together. So much of the history I've learned, it's like, that's great. Now I'm learning additional history, which either challenges certain things I've learned, or it supports it, or it's a gap that fills in, or it's something that runs right with it. So it's important to get the whole story of things that are going on. That's being an informed person. That's being somebody who is reflective of what's happening. Wanted to give a reminder to people that if they really want to go to these activities on Tuesday, they need to get the information to the groups. So the Juneteenth activity, that's going to be at Tillis Park from 5:30 to 8:30 this Tuesday. Again, please call Kathleen Martin at 314-249-3968 or email sisterscarestl@gmail.com. So advanced registration is required. Adults are $15. Children ages 5 to 10, $7. Children under 5, free. And if you're interested in the Griot Museum, you can contact the Griot Museum at 314-241-7057 about their activity on Tuesday evening. I believe that's $10 their activity, and that's from 5:30 to 8:30. That's the Juneteenth celebration and the 40 acres and a mule celebration.
This has been just such inspirational knowledge. I mean, what you have imparted today, I think, has really taken research to a greater level, because I have to admit I did not know of the Griot Museum before you brought this to my attention. Again, I love museums, and St. Louis is just rich in that type of knowledge, that type of resource. And unfortunately, so many of these museums are suffering, they're struggling, they're dying on the vine because of lack of support. So, again, when we start to support issues, or, it's easy to say, oh, we're going to help the homeless, we're going to support the people that can't eat. Yes, we know that. But look at all these when we lose history, when we lose that knowledge, generations will come up that have no understanding of who they are and from where they come. And to me, once you understand who you are, whose you are, and whom you are, then you eliminate some of these other social issues. I've always said to my children, you are descendants of kings and queens. So therefore you act that way. You act with royalty. You act with dignity. That is you. And you never allow anyone to say that your beginning was as a slave. Your beginning was as a king and a queen. What a difference in how you view yourself and how you will respond. So we have to look at a lot of those kinds of situations. And when you take a look at what's happening right now, just kind of a little bit of a political statement here. When you look at what's happening to the immigrant children who are being right now displaced, being separated from their families, and the emotional and collective trauma that exists because of that, it impacts generations. And our doctors are saying that right now, that the separation of those children from their parents is creating problems that we will be dealing with down the road for years and years and possibly generations to come. So when you look at the African American, and you think of what happened to us as we were taken away, we were stolen from our families, removed from our language, even our names were changed. And then you still expect us to act in a certain way. I think that is not realistic.
Well, it goes back to the very first conversation we had in the first hour as it relates to freedmen from the South who became refugees. And the understanding and the focus was like, what are we going to do with all these people? How are we going to manage them? How are we going to make sure that they engage in society and be citizens that give back? And they wanted to.
Exactly. They wanted to give back. That's right.
But then you get into government pulling one way or another, or different groups pulling one way or another, or power or money, influencing these things. And what really is extremely unfortunate doesn't even scratch the surface of how I feel about this or where my thought is. But the ones that always suffer are the people who end up you're trying to help. And things get discombobulated to the point where, as we saw in the 40 acres and a mule thing, things get totally flipped on their head.
Well, it goes back to that whole concept, that notion of I'm from the government, I'm here to help.
Yeah.
It's like,
right.
yeah.
If that's the case, I'm walking out.
I'm walking out. We have to really look at how do the actions of today, how do they impact generations down the road? And we have a history of being able to go back and look at what did certain actions, how did it impact groups of people? And then not make those same mistakes again with a different group of people.
I shouldn't say we've never, but we don't read history and understand the lessons and the mistakes that were made, so we don't have to remake those mistakes again.
And the problem is because of economics becomes the driving force behind these decisions. It's kind of like I look at corporations and they let off 3,000, 5,000 people, and they say, but look, we've just become more profitable. And I've always looked at that and said, wait, you may have become more profitable, but you took those 5,000 families, and what have you done to their life? You've taken and shifted the responsibility of them earning a living wage and being able to live and do certain things. You've shifted that responsibility from your corporation to cities and states and other institutions. So you can say that you're more profitable. That, to me, those two things don't jive. You become more profitable because you change your modality. You change the way that you operate and the way that you continue to forge good avenues, economic avenues for all of your people.
Well, and whether it's a private or a public entity, or I should say I'm thinking of a corporation. That has stock that is on the market, excuse me, versus someone who is not. How much do you need? How much money do you need to pursue in your lifetime? If you're a stockholder, obviously they want a payback on their money. If you're a private entity, how much do you need? And I remember Mark McGuire said, this is why I'm staying here. How much money do you need at $6.5 million a year? And now that's like a pittance salary.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right, because I could do a whole lot on $6.5 million.
Oh my gosh.
A whole lot. I think Chris could probably do just tremendous with 6.5. He'd probably do well with $3 million. He's looking at me like, no, I don't think so.
I live a pauper's life now. I'm happy with just the bare minimum.
And we do become minimalist as we get older. I've been reading about that. There was a whole book I was reading just recently about being a minimalist, and that is living with less.
Well, Ellie, I've never seen a hearse pull a U-Haul.
That's right, exactly. And I always say that when I see these really, really wealthy people and they die, I go, they still died.
It didn't keep them alive.
You can't take it with you.
Can't take it with you. That's right.
Speaking about that, laughter is the best medicine.
I look forward to this. As a matter of fact, you know what? I'm going to have Chris prepare a very special group of sound effects. Okay? Because this is a real good segment. I know everyone waits for this. It's kind of like Arnold's whatever.
Oh yeah, we need an intro, and we probably need some a laugh track, maybe
laugh track,
a really
that's right.
a corny, really obviously canned laugh track from the mid '60s or something.
Exactly.
Certainly.
So, how are you going to tickle our funny bones today?
Well, if laughter is the best medicine, it is the best medicine. But if you're laughing without any reason, you need medicine.
I've been there. Let me tell you, there have been days that I have just busted out. And I had to stop and go, what am I laughing at?
Now, we just talked about growing older, and when I get old, I'm not going to be sitting around writing memoirs. I'm going to click my life alert button to see how many firefighters show up.
I did have that happen, though. Believe it or not. My mom and I were messing around with our alarm system, and somehow we triggered the fire alarm, and we couldn't get it to turn off. That was the bad thing. Before we knew it, we had 2 police cars, the fire department, and a detective's car in front of our house. So now, all of our neighbors are running out thinking that my 90-year-old mom has, croaked or something like that. And I had to say, I was so embarrassed. I told him, I said, I'm sorry, but it was the battery in our smoke detector.
Defective battery.
It was, but they were so great, and they showed up, and they were gracious, and they I guess they had to make it a run that was worth something, so they replaced all the batteries in our fire extinguisher.
There you go.
And our smoke detectors that night.
So I may look like I'm having deep thoughts, but 99% of the time I'm thinking about what I'm going to eat later. I wish I lived in a world where mosquitoes would suck fat instead of blood.
Oh my gosh. I know a place like that.
Well, and starting tomorrow, whatever life throws at me, I'm ducking so it hits someone else.
Just make sure that you're not behind a window or anything like that so that it ends up costing someone.
Now, if you have your boss tell you this, I'm not saying to do this because it could get you in trouble.
Uh-oh.
But
Chris, take note.
My boss told me to have a good day, so I went home.
Chris would never leave here. His best days are spent when he's here in this studio. Even when he was sick, he was still listening and texting us. And
I really missed you guys.
we missed you too. We did. So
Okay, so if you haven't grown up by age 50, you don't have to.
I know so many people that fall into that category.
That's great. I mean, no pressure, right?
No pressure. That's right. If I could just make it to 50.
Yeah, you pass 50 and then you don't even have to worry about it anymore.
So my blood type is coffee.
Wait, but is it decaf? Is it hazelnut?
Yeah,
Is it French
exactly.
vanilla? Well, what is it? Light roast, dark roast?
Oh, my.
I was just up at my favorite bread company up in Webster. I have to give another shameless plug. And I love their coffees. And sometimes I just take, it's like I take a cup and it's a little bit of each one. I got some hazelnut, I got some dark roast, I got some light roast, I got some decaf. I just put them all together, and then they wonder, people say, what's wrong with you, Ellie?
You have to tell that to Angela from the morning crew because she's all about mixing salad dressings and stuff. Yeah, she would really love to have that conversation with you.
Okay, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
All right, so when you get angry, take a breath and count to 10. Throw a punch at 8. Nobody expects that.
That's good.
I don't mean to brag, but I finished my 14-day diet in 3 hours and 12 minutes.
Arnold, you come up with the stupidest stuff, man, I tell you. But don't want to brag, but...
But, unicorns are real. They're just fat and gray, and we call them rhinos.
Oh, my goodness.
I have multiple personalities, and none of them like you.
And none of them like you.
Oh, my. Don't waste your time with explanations. People will hear what they want to hear.
Oh, now that's a sad one.
That's very true, though.
It is very true. It's kind of like, go to church. This is a good way of doing it. When you go to church, come out, because we know we only remember the sermon for at least 1 hour, maybe after we've heard it. So come out and immediately ask 10 people, what did the pastor preach on today? And just see what comes out of their mouths, okay?
Well, here's Facebook's been in the news recently,
Yes, recently, a little bit.
A lot.
A lot?
Yeah, a lot. And they kind of had another snafu the other day. So it's kind of a constant snafu. But Facebook, because time isn't going to kill itself.
That's right.
So no, it's important to laugh. We know we sometimes they're silly, sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're serious, but laughter's really good.
And sometimes it's just doggone tragic. You just have to laugh, because if you didn't, you'd probably go out and, like you said, on count 8, punch somebody.
Well, it's kind of like this one. Scientists claim smiling can lengthen your life, unless that smile belongs to a shark.
Yeah. I always, you have to take your fingers. I wish people could see this. You take your index finger and your middle finger, and then you take that other, the ring finger and the pinky finger. Go bum 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 bum.
That was a freaky movie. I remember seeing that, and I was like, wow. And then when we went to see the actual shark in California when I was in high school, it was like, that's lame.
I will tell you though, Jaws did change my whole attitude about going into the water on the East Coast. Very much so.
Oh yeah.
And then now when you look at it, just this past week, they were talking about how many people were stung in South Florida by jellyfish within a very short period of time. And, there's certain times of the year when you really should not go in the water in Florida.
Exactly.
And all these jellyfish, these man-o-war jellyfish, attack these people. Well, I've been stung by a man-o-war down in Florida, and the coast and the lifeguard came and rubbed meat tenderizer into my wound. I don't know which one hurt worse. The jellyfish.
I thought you were going to say aloe.
No, meat tenderizer. And I mean,
What?
It was so painful. It's been a while since I've gone in the water when I go to Florida.
No kidding. No, it's very important to take care and be careful on those things, because they've been talking about shark attacks a lot recently too, especially down in Florida.
That's right.
Anybody going down to Florida here, just pay attention to what's going on down there.
Yeah, and the stuff that's in the water too.
That's right. That's right. No, this is KWRHLP 92.9 FM. For In Tune, engineer Chris Verdacey, co-host Ellie Wharton, I'm Arnold Stricker. We thank you for joining us today. Until next time, walk worthy and let your light shine.
Bye-bye.